Hello and welcome to Chapter 2, Lesson 4, Multiplying Integers. Please make sure you have the following notes in front of you. Essential question: what happens when you multiply integers? So when we're multiplying integers, it's different from adding and subtracting. We don't need to worry about absolute value. We don't need to worry about the additive inverse. The rules are pretty simple. So step one, we're going to decide on the sign. Very straightforward. If you're multiplying integers and they have different signs, the product of two integers with different signs is negative. Well, on the other hand, the product of two integers with the same sign is positive. So looking at example 1, step 1, decide on the sign, I see I have a negative 3 and a positive 12. So the signs are different, which means my answer is going to be negative. And now I just multiply 3 times 12, which is 36. Next example, negative 4 times negative 7. Again, first I'm going to decide on the sign. The signs are the same, which means it's a positive. And then I'm going to find the product. I'm going to multiply 4 times 7 is 28. The third example, we have negative 6 times 12. Decide on the sign. The signs are different, so it's negative. And then 6 times 12 is 72. Moving on to the next row. Now we're multiplying more than just two integers. So we could do this one of two ways. First, I'll do it the longer way where we just go from left to right. So positive 8 times positive 6 will give me a positive 42 because they have the same signs. And then now I'm looking and I have different signs, which means my answer is going to be negative. And then 42 times 2 is 84. So negative 84 is my answer. For the next example, going left to right, negative 1 times positive 50, signs are different. So I get a negative 50. And then I'm going to multiply negative 50 times negative 1. So signs are the same, which results in a positive, and 50 times 1 is 50. Last example, 6 times 0 gives me 0. And 0 times negative 2, it's not going to give me a negative 0 because there's no such thing. 0 times any number is 0. So there is a little shortcut when you're multiplying more than two integers. If there is an odd number of negatives, then that means your answer is going to be negative. And if there's an even number of negatives, your answer is going to be positive. So looking back at the 8 times 6 times negative 2, there's an odd number of negatives, which means that there's only one negative. So I would know that my answer would be negative. And then I'd do 8 times 6 is 48, times 2 is 84. So we can figure out the sign without having to go left to right. For example 2, I see that there's a negative 1 and a negative 1. So there are two negatives, which is an even number of negatives, which means my answer should be positive. 1 times 50 is 50. 50 times 1 is 50. So results in the same answer. And just a trick, anytime I can have 6 or 7 or 8 integers, if I'm multiplying by a 0 anywhere in there, it's automatically going to give me a 0 for the answer. Turn the page. Make sure you have the following notes in front of you. Algebraic expressions. You can use the rules for multiplying integers to simplify and solve algebraic expressions. So for examples, the ones down below here, let's say example 1, 2, and 3, we are going to just be simplifying these expressions using the integer rules for multiplying. So I have negative 7a times 4b. So the variable part of the expression, I can't do anything to simplify that because they're different variables. But the coefficient part, the number that comes before the variable, I can simplify and multiply those. So I'm going to multiply the coefficients by each other. Negative 7 times positive 4. Signs are different, so it gives me a negative 28. And then I'm going to multiply a and b. So the way that we could write this simplified would be negative 28ab. Next example, we have negative 3 times negative 6y. Again, you're going to go ahead and multiply the coefficient part to each other. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and 3 times 6 is 18. Don't forget to include that y. Next example, we have 9x times negative 3y. So the first thing I want to do is to multiply the coefficient. 9 times negative 3. Signs are different, so that's a negative 27. And then x times y would be xy. So we're left with negative 27xy. For the last 3 examples, we're going to be evaluating an expression where we substitute values for the variables. So it says evaluate 3xy if x equals 2 and y equals negative 6. So the first thing we want to do is rewrite the expression substituting values. So I'm going to keep the 3 and I'm multiplying that by x, which is 2, and then multiplying that by y, which is negative 6. So using my shortcut, I only have one negative, an odd number of negatives, so my answer is going to be negative. And then if I multiply across, 3 times 2 is 6, and then 6 times 6 is 36. So I would have a negative 36 as my answer. Next one, evaluate 2rs if r equals 5 and s equals negative 10. So again, substitute your values. R is 5, s is negative 10. First, deciding on my sign, there's an odd number of negatives, which means my answer is going to be negative. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. And then the last one, evaluate 4 times a times b if a equals negative 8 and b equals negative 4. So I'm going to substitute a is negative 8 and b is negative 4. So now with this one, my signs, or I have an even number of negatives, which means my answer is going to be positive. So when I go ahead and multiply, 4 times 8 is 32, and then I want to do 32 times 4, which will give me a positive 128. Go ahead and do the guided practice problems on your own, and we will go over these first thing in class tomorrow. Thank you.